Well, hi there, and welcome to another episode on NetSupport Radio. As you know, we like to cover all sorts of topics covering the education landscape. And I'm really, really pleased to be able to introduce Brianna Hodges to the show today. Hi, Brianna.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you. Lovely to see you. And I can see you've got a nice outdoor setting for today's episode, just to add a bit of ambience to it.
Just a little bit, it's summer, it's warm. What a better way to express what 2020 has been for all of us is kind of moving to different environments and really learning where we're at. So I'm actually traveling with my son for the week, and he's 12 years old, and he is a camp counselor for the first time at a horse camp, at an equine camp. And so I dropped him off this morning and then ran to the nearest coffee shop that I could find in this little old town, and found myself sitting outside with you. So what an example of what we're living in these days.
Blended podcasting or something similar.
Very much.
Well, I'm very jealous because your weather is certainly better than it is this side, but nonetheless, we've got plenty to talk about. Now, I have to confess, normally when I'm having a conversation about things that we're doing in education, often I'm sitting the other side of the conversation, and I try and explain that I'm a kind of a man of two hats. I looked at your bio and I thought, well, this is a woman of about 22 hats. How on earth am I going to explain all the things that you are involved in or your experience? So rather than listening to me, could I ask you to find somehow a way of summarizing all of your experience and focus?
Well, I will try. I typically say that I have had many lives along the way, and I certainly won't bore everyone with all of my sordid details of my past. But I started out in national political fundraising, specifically for high national and state level campaigns, and that was while I was finishing college, and then into my my post undergrad years. And then I left politics in fundraising and moved into nonprofit fundraising. I always say that I needed to cleanse my soul and get some karma back. And then that moved from from nonprofit fundraising into marketing and public relations for major hospitals in Texas. And then I kind of was trying to decide. I loved my work and spent a lot of time doing a lot of education, actually, really from the marketing standpoint of patient education and stakeholder education. And I come from a really, really long line of educators. My father, in fact, was a professor of 25 plus years, and going back generations, we've just a family of educators, and he had always been after me to go into education, and so I decided to formally do that and became an eighth grade English teacher and basketball coach, and I share all of that background because when I started teaching, I was teaching ethos, pathos, logos, all of these like really scary things to kids, and my background in marketing, specifically for hospitals, we all have those really scary things that we are told not to Google, right? Like that's what every doctor tells you not to do. And my job with the hospitals was to take these really scary things, even the most exciting things in our lives, like having babies and things like that, are really scary when you really start to look at it. And it was to take these really complex things and make them more comfortable for people and help them understand it. So what we did was, we would create these microsites, and so we would take, just a little sub-site off of our platform, and then we would really go into detail over what were the things that we were trying to communicate. So maybe and we would use different things, right? We would use interviews with people, we would use infographics, we would use videos, animations, whatever we needed to do at that point to help bring that information in a more comfortable way. And so, fast forward to my time in the classroom, that's what I did. Was I just went with what I knew worked with our general public, right? And I did that, and we saw a lot of success with our kids just because. And it wasn't anything like, oh, click here and play this video that's going to teach you this type of focus. It was more of that supplementary type material. So like I would explain it, and then we would have different ways of interpreting it and understanding it. And so they got to really enjoy that multimodality. And so then that flipped into a lot of success in the classroom, which then moved me into district administration, doing digital learning and learning experience and engagement, which is kind of fancy for instruction and professional learning. And now I consult full time. And so so I sum it all up to say that I was really reflecting a few years ago over what is it that I do. All of us in this space were like, what are we known for? All of these different elements, and I just really couldn't come up with my thing, because I was like, we don't sometimes see that amongst ourselves. And so one day I called one of my friends, and I was like, I think I figured it out. And like, what's that? And I said, well, what made me really good as a fundraiser in politics is that you take the stories of the candidate, and you choose them based upon your audience, and you help people understand who that person is, and really kind of provide a touch point for them. And then I said, it's the same thing in marketing, was helping those stories come to life, those stories of success, those stories of overcoming obstacles and things like that. And then the same thing in the classroom, and moving forward. It's like, so what I'm really good at is I'm kind of good at finding stories and helping strategically connect our outcomes, our desired outcomes, with our medium, based upon story, experience, and all that stuff. And so it was funny because that person was like, well, I mean, no kidding, like that's the thing, like how did you not know that? Everybody knows that about you. And I started laughing, and I was like, well, some of us are a little bit slower than others. So yeah, so that's where I'm at now. Is I definitely really lean into that how do we use vision, or how do we craft, create our vision, and bring it in such a way that we can create and maintain and sustain implementation and connection with our stakeholders. There you go.
I love that.
Sorry, my
we had a little
camera's
bit.
flying around a little bit.
That's all right. We're getting the real world outdoor experience today. I was going to say, I love the that kind of continuity of some of those skills acquired in the private sector, that the ability to best represent and shape a narrative, and that storytelling that feeds through into what you're delivering in a pedagogy sense. It's kind of really nice to see those skills kind of accumulate. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was kind of a bit of a helicopter view, looking kind of bigger picture. I know that you referenced a quote by Miguel Cardona, the US Secretary of Education, about that this is a one-time generational opportunity to hit the reset button. And I know in the UK, we've had lots of conversations recently about needing a bigger narrative and a plan for education that isn't locked down to a single governmental term, and actually looking bigger picture. So I wondered, from your point of view and your experiences in the US, what do you think is the key opportunity that you see that's available right now that needs to be addressed?
I think, it's funny because I think a lot of us that have been in this work for a while, we've talked about, and it's with such, kid gloves that we say this, right? In the deepest of respect to the true and deep tragedies that have happened through this pandemic, right? I'm not making light of that by any stretch of the imagination, but those of us that have been in this work are, there is a little brief moment of celebration for the fact of the pandemic really did push us into a circumstance, a universal circumstance of, now we can really wrap our minds around this as a possibility. Before, there was always a lot of pushback, like, oh, we don't have the technology to do this, or oh, it has to happen in person. And so I think that we've certainly, we're well positioned to finally the opportunity for change. So I think that that's, I think that that's a difference that we haven't had before, because again, before we really had that like pushback. That said, it's really, really interesting for me to look at it in this, in this country of a lot of people are recognizing,
I think we've just lost Brianna briefly there. And
am I back? Am I back?
you're back.
Okay,
You were just
sorry.
telling us that a lot of people were recognizing.
Yes, a lot of people are recognizing the need for the really the disparities that we have in education, and I think that it's this realization that, just because we believe that we are providing an equitable opportunity within the four walls of the classroom, we're really not, right? And we're finally getting to that point of understanding that there are depths and complexities to equitable opportunities, equitable situations that that we might not have really. I don't want to say that we didn't realize we're there. I think it's that we really more we didn't know how to address it, and we still don't know how to address it, right? But now we're grappling with it, and so I think that that's one of the exciting things right now is to really wrestle with that circumstance and say, okay, now that we are in this situation where we know that school doesn't work well for everyone, we know that equitable success is not there, and so how do we provide, a personalized circumstance outside of a generalized situation, which is what we've always tried to do. We've always tried to generalize everything at the same time of trying to elevate personalized learning, and that doesn't work well, right? And so I think that it's really embracing this opportunity to recognize that technology and this opportunity of recognizing the multiple pedagogies that are at place are allowing for us to better personalize that experience for learning based upon need and based upon circumstance and based upon, really ever-changing environments. Like, it's not necessarily like once you signed up, you're in this for a year now, right? Like we've seen that. We've seen the quick agility that's required, and that's truly at hand here. Where you don't have to just be exclusively in person. You can have that true blended experience, and I think that we really, and that we don't ourselves flipping back and forth to that more, regimented, this is the only way that we're going to provide this.
It's really nice to hear you say that, because much of what you say resonates with experiences that we've seen this side. And one was, and it's always hard to shape, that actually the positive coming out of the pandemic was that catalyst for this narrative of something that was never top of the priority to suddenly be up the agenda. And apart from the digital equality challenge, the biggest challenge we see is that now we've experienced and started using some new tools, how do we embed them rather than slip back to the way before and lose those newly acquired skills? So, it's interesting. I think the truth of it is this is a universal challenge that we're seeing around the world, and geography doesn't really change that kind of priority. If I can move on to another conversation, I'm keen to find out about one of the things that you're obviously recognized as an expert in school planning and strategic thinking, and working with schools around the country. Have you noticed a significant shift in the language used by school leadership from before the pandemic to now?
I think so. I think that we're moving from a individual priorities to really more community-based priorities. And so what I mean by that is, oftentimes before, when we started looking at there may be a visitor that's pulling in next to me, so we might have a family step out behind me, just FYI. I think that, before, when we would talk about strategic planning, a lot of times it would be from kind of the top down, right? It was the superintendent or the head of schools or whatever that looked like would say, okay, this is what I really feel like we need to focus on, and that oftentimes, was a product of lots of conversations that had happened from, multiple committees and communities moving into it, but it definitely wasn't always representative of stakeholders at large in the community. And I think that what I'm seeing a lot, and what I mean by that is a lot self-inflicted pressures of, okay, well, these other really great performing schools are doing these things, and so we need to do that, so we'll be a great performing school. And what I'm seeing now is really a lot more self-awareness of the community that they have. And so instead of seeking the silver bullet that's going to fix everything and make us perfect just the way that we believe that people next door are perfect, we're really leaning into that self-awareness of who are our stakeholders, who are our students, who are their parents, where do they live, what are they expecting. There's a lot of wording that is truly rooted in empathy, and I think that is, to me, it's so refreshing because it's no longer a force of this is what we're going to try to do with our it's not taking our initiative and forcing it into our circumstance. It's taking our circumstances and pushing it out to our community. It's finding those pain points, if you will, and really leaning into what's going on with everything else. That how can we better provide circumstances as solutions to our stakeholders instead of saying like this is what we provide. It's almost it's flipping the mentality from a almost kind of a business model of like this is what we provide, and if that's what you want and that's what works for you, then come to our school. And then instead really leaning into that concept of the school as the hub of the community and saying, okay, here's what our community needs and this is how we're going to provide it to best lift them up and bring them into those circumstances. So it's been great to like really see that recognition of who we are.
I really like to hear that because one of the strong narratives has been about trying to avoid the prescriptive approach and recognize that every school and every community is different. And there's often been a sense that success is measured by how much technology or how much or change you deliver within the school, when it's never a race to the top. It's about what's needed and what has the right impact for your cohort. So it's lovely to see you kind of focusing on that side of things, Brianna. One thing that is talked about a lot here, and I'm not a fan of a term which is often referred to as catch up, and I don't like the idea of talking to young people about something in a negative sense. Often it's referred to as learning disruption, learning loss, and so on. I'm interested in your perspectives of what you've seen in the US, particularly as if you've seen it's been amplified at certain age ranges, or whether you've seen a kind of a universal constant on that.
Well, I think it is. I'm not a fan of those words either, and I think it is really interesting because oftentimes we act like this is all brand new too, right? Like, and that's been something that I've talked about a lot in the last 18 months. Is again not to downplay the significance of the pandemic. However, there's nothing about teaching or education that has ever been a guarantee or a consistent promise of any experience. I mean, as a secondary teacher, none of my classes were ever the same, right? None of my students were ever the same. And what I thought would work really well in first period, that did indeed work really well in first period, was completely off the radar in third period, right? And so I would often have to start over again. And I think that there's a lot of that kicks into it. The reason why I say that is because the term learning loss or catch up or any of this is not new. We have always talked about there being some kind of, we used to call it, or we still call it, the summer slide, or any kind of whatever you want to say about it. And really what it boils down to is it's not that these kids aren't understanding. Like, they're not at a deficit because they were not in, because of a time situation. The deficit tends to come from the fact that there are inequalities in place in their environment, wherever their learning environment may be, right? And so there's fantastic research out there. I think it's from the original study was 1986, and I think it's replicated in 2003, of what impact the environment has specifically on reading. And they measured this by, you know, they really wanted to know, like, what happens at home. And so, you know, what exposure do you have at home? So, the researchers went in and did it specifically for California, looked at 3 schools. They looked at three communities, I should say, Beverly Hills, Compton, and Watts. And so, you know, pretty significant differences of economic and you know, kind of standards of living in there. And they found that in Beverly Hills, the average home contained 25,000 instances of text. And so that family was exposed to 25,000 different instances of text. So whether those was, you know, books or magazines or whatever the case. When they went to Compton, that was down to 7. When they went to Watts, that was down to 3. And so it's not a and you know, basically what the research came to was exposure to text is it, you know, you can only maintain your reading if you are reading at home, right? Like if you know, and all of us see this. We see this in our physical fitness, right? Like if you're working out 3 and 4 and 5 times a day, and then suddenly you go on vacation for a month and you don't do anything outside of, you know, walk from your hotel room to the restaurant, your physical fitness is going to go way down, right? Like you are going to lose what you created by building all of that up. And so I think that we oftentimes we're pointing the blame at the wrong situation. The situation is not, hey, let's punish these kids by bringing them and trying to, you know, make over their situation. Instead, it's how can we provide a similar situation to keep them nourished along the way as they're, you know, wherever they're at. And I think that instead of trying to blame technology as the reason for why they're not better, leverage technology to provide that nourishing opportunity, because we can, you know, we can't necessarily send home thousands of books with every single child, but what we can do is we can provide a device that has access to thousands of books, and then provide an opportunity for them to continue, you know, to have to really tap into that. But again, it's the change of blame, right? It's not blaming the device. It's how can we, because the device is the tool, so how can we, instead of teaching the kids to use the tool, how can we help them use that tool for learning, and really kind of, you know, teach them to fish and help them understand that all of these things will raise their opportunity. You know, I mean, it's the same conversation that has been in literacy circles for so long, right? Of like, do comic books count? Do picture books count? Do, you know, it's like how can we help understand that reading is reading, and you know, like, again, what a better opportunity to really lean into this quote unquote real world application, right? Like math is all around us, reading is all around us, science is all around us. Let's help our kids understand, our kids and our parents and all of our, as I like to say, learning of all ages and stages, that learning is constant. It's a verb for a reason. It's an ing for a reason, right? Because it is present tense, it is constant. And if we have to stop claiming that, I think as an educator, we have to stop claiming learning as only happening in a classroom. If we would lean into that and really kind of spread the love and let people understand that it's truly present everywhere, I think we'd see that number of quote unquote learning loss go way down, and really pass that responsibility on to all of us.
I really love hearing you explain that, because I think we all recognise that the ability to read and the vocabulary and the linguistic skills that young people develop unlock so many of the other academic pathways as they grow past a certain age. You know, even math at a very early stage is very numerical, but actually very quickly it becomes understanding the problem, understanding the descriptors around it. And I absolutely sign up to the fact you're right. Reading is reading, and I think the first thing is to engage young people enjoying reading. The content almost becomes a secondary challenge in the bigger picture of things. Now, that's a really interesting kind of viewpoint that you shared there. I'm interested for those listening in. If we could give you a top 2 or 3 tips that you could advise districts in the coming school year, what would you kind of prioritize as things they should be thinking about?
So the first thing that I like to especially this time of year, now that we've kind of wound down from the previous situation and we're starting to look ahead, is to take an audit. And I have one on my website that you can download, and but it's called Audit the Now. And so it's basically 3 steps. The first one is to reflect on what worked really, really well. Like, what were the things that you're like, this was awesome, I can't do without this. We really want to do that. And kind of expand your thinking again on what that means. And whether you're in the classroom or you're a superintendent, run that through. And then the second step is the direct opposite. So it's the, like, what was terrible? What do you want trash? That you're like, I don't care if we ever do another Zoom faculty meeting again. I mean, whatever it is. And say why it is. And in there, I have a couple reflection questions of, like, why was it terrible? What was, was it the concept? Was it the execution of it? What were those elements that come into it? And then the third one is what has possibility. So, like, what needs to be tweaked? And what I mean by that is, like, what was almost there, right? That you're like, this was good, but it could be even better. And really identify what are those things that you can kind of push. When we're looking at this, like in curriculum, when I'm guiding curriculum deep dives and assessment deep dives, so the big thing with stakeholders is really you have to have that opportunity to look through multiple lenses. One of the situations, again, to go back to a previous conversation that we were having, is that when we take the district initiative and then try to cram that into our situation instead of looking at the situations of our community. So really dive into those stakeholder lenses and see what their experience is. What their experience has been, truly lean into that empathy lens. I do a lot of work with districts across the country, and across the world, even around what, how do we really do a deep dive into that. And so I won't do it justice to try to explain that really quickly, but just to say that there's a lot of work that goes into crafting empathy. And then the third and final thing that I would say I really, really would recommend that we do is take a strong look at outcomes. Understand the power of why. If we just do things because that's what we think we're supposed to do, we have to back it out and say, why do we need to do this? Why is it important? That goes from a curriculum standpoint, that goes from an instruction standpoint, all of those elements. When we know what we're doing, we can only choose the best thing to do when we know why we need to do it. And so, ask that question, why, multiple times.
I absolutely agree on that. And it's actually a really nice segue into kind of the last thing I wanted to ask you about was, wearing my technology hat, I'm a big fan, and NetSupport is very much focused around co-production, developing our solutions with schools. And obviously over the last 2 years, where schools have had that catalyst to try new things, often quickly to meet a need, we've also got to be mindful of that move to evidence-based, how we're looking at solutions have impact. So I'm really keen to understand whether you've seen a change in the relationships between vendors and schools, and also that kind of how we're measuring the evidence behind the technology.
So I think that goes, and I love that you said that co-development, because I think that again speaks into that shared responsibility of circumstance, right? Like anytime that, and I think this is true whether it's a technology vendor, whether it's the vehicle that you drive, or the house that you live in, any type of situation where we're looking to someone else as a provider, we never find everything that we want, right? Like nobody ever gets 100% of those boxes checked. And we always go back and we say, man, I wish that it had this and this and this. Or wouldn't it be cool if it had this and this? And your favorite vendors, your favorite companies to work with are those that listen to what it is that you're concerned about,
Yep.
and they adapt with agility quickly, right? Like they don't just say like, oh, that's a good idea. Man, I wish we could come up with that, but we can't, but they will tell you with a lot of honesty and vulnerability whether or not they can provide it. But they're quick to respond with an opportunity to get your business and to help you see that this is indeed a product that you can add into your environment. And I am seeing a lot of that come further into the light in the last 18 months. I think there's that willingness, again, going back to the earlier conversations, of so much before we said, oh no, that can't happen. We were quick to understand our strengths and only handle our strengths. We didn't want to get into the messiness of not having a perfect solution. Now we're understanding that, and I think our call today is probably the best example of that, is like perfect doesn't always exist, and we're going to get a lot more out of trying it and getting some of those pieces to come together, and that's better than nothing, right? So
Absolutely.
I think that's where we're seeing a lot of that movement towards.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm also conscious that one of the most important things that has really amplified over the last couple of years has been that thing that educators are best at, which is sharing, reflective practice, giving out ideas to peers. Obviously, you very kindly are sharing your thoughts and experiences with us here on NetSupport Radio. But in the spirit of podcasting is absolutely a really kind of a force to be reckoned with, particularly in the education space. Could you give us a bit of a summary about Lemonade Learning Podcast?
Absolutely. Well, I will also say it totally came from, oops, I lost one of my pause. It totally came from the pandemic. It stemmed from me, and I was at home with my kids and trying to manage their learning and trying to maintain my work. And I was honestly laughing and somewhat crying to myself over the fact that I, as someone who does this across the country, was struggling with doing this at home with my own kids. And so I reached out to a friend, to Lainey Rao, and for help with maintaining and managing the learning at home. And she said, we should really do something together. And I said, sure. And she was like, how about a podcast? And I was like, okay. It was one of those where it's like, I've been on a lot of podcasts, but I've never made one. But okay, sure, let's figure this out. And so we really did. And what it stemmed from was us having a conversation about how so many of these struggles that we were experiencing as educators were not necessarily new. They were new to us. They were new to our set of circumstances, but they weren't something that we hadn't dealt with before. And I made the statement of, this is not, this is lemonade learning. Like, we're taking all of the lemons that just keep coming at us, right? Like, they just keep hitting us left and right.
Yeah.
And we're taking all of them and we're squeezing the best out of it, and we're making lemonade learning. And so, that stuck. And what we've created is a podcast that, again, truly stemmed from me reaching out to one of my colleagues that I truly respect and asking her advice and her insight. And it's just kind of snowballed from there. It's been, that's kind of core to our circumstance, is to take a situation that we're not really 100% sure about, that we're trying to grapple with, or that, many of our schools or districts that we work with are trying to grapple with. And we reach out to an educator expert and say, okay, how do we do this? Help us mix up this batch and make it, the best that we can, suited to the taste that we need. And it's been such an enjoyable experience. Lady and I actually were just talking yesterday, and we still just surprise ourselves. We shake our heads and say this. When we started, we had no idea that anybody would even listen. We thought like it was going to just be recorded therapy for the both of us, and now it has truly become just such a great opportunity to process and to realize, just like you said, we're all experiencing things across the globe in a universal situation. That doesn't mean it's happening all at the same time, and it doesn't mean that our solutions will all be the same thing. But what it means is that there's somebody out there that you can look at that has walked a similar path that you have, and there's somebody that you can look to and say, hey, can you help me out? I'm struggling with this. I don't know how to do this. And they're going to be able to give you some tips and tricks along the way. And that's been a really great circumstance to find another positive that's coming out of this, right? Like there's a good network that you can always lean into to help survive what you're experiencing in the moment.
Absolutely. The word that always springs to mind for me with education is the word community, both in a professional sense as well as the communities that our schools serve. And I think it's something that everyone should be really proud of, that the time people give up to share advice and ideas. And it's always a two-way street. The more you share, the more you learn back from others. So it's definitely a win-win. Now, we've shared the link to your Lemonade Learning podcast on the bottom of the screen. You obviously talked about your great audit checklist. Where would people head to find out more about you, Brianna, and your resources?
Yeah, I would love for you to visit my website. I think we have it on the screen. It's briannahodges.com. Reach out. There's a contact form on there. You can ask me any questions. You can also find me literally on every social media at bhodgesedu. So if it's Twitter, Instagram, Voxer, Facebook. I have a TikTok, but I have not braved the TikTok world. So if you want to tag me, I'll watch your stuff, and maybe, who knows, maybe you'll inspire me to actually jump out there and do some of it on my own. But I just to echo what you just said, Al, like the community, the network that we have is so important. And the only time that we grow is when we're together. And whether that's virtually or that's textual or that's in person, I think that no matter what, we have a connection and we want to build that. And I always say that every story starts with a great introduction, and so we got to have that opportunity to be introduced, and then we can move forward.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you so much for weathering the birds, the wind, the cars, the trucks, and everything else for our chat.
Thank you. Yeah. I wish you could have some of these little donuts that I got. These are fantastic. I'm going to send some over there to you so you can experience them, because these are.
I could torture you, but I keep asking you more questions so you don't get to eat them. But
that's okay. That's okay. I would be a mess by now. But they're croissant based. They're excellent. I highly recommend them. So. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been wonderful, and I thank you for being very patient and gracious with my ever-changing circumstances of technology. But it's been great to connect and to talk.
It's been my pleasure, and I think the last half an hour has been a perfect example of the last 18 months encapsulated in terms of just adapting to the situation we face. So thank you so much. Keep safe, and lovely talking to you.
Yes, you as well. Thank you so much.